The Jazz Journalists Association is in the midst of its spring campaign. Please check out the 2025 Jazz Heroes, activists, advocates, altruists, aiders, and abettors of jazz, posted at www.jjajazzawards.org, and help us celebrating them if they're near you. The 30th annual JJA Jazz Awards are coming up. We will announce winners of awards in 44 categories for excellence in jazz and jazz journalism on May 1st. Again, go to jjajazzawards.org or jjanews.org for more information about the Jazz Journalists Association.
Welcome to The Buzz, the podcast of the Jazz Journalists Association, where we discuss the news and views from those in the jazz media, writers, broadcasters, photographers, videographers, and other professionals documenting the entire ecosystem of jazz. I'm Rick Mitchell, a longtime jazz journalist, broadcaster, and JJA board member. Today on The Buzz, we're going to be talking with Zev Feldman and Ashley Kahn on the subject of jazz journalism and archival releases. Zev Feldman is an internationally recognized Grammy-nominated independent record producer and co-president of Resonance Records in Los Angeles. He has been dubbed the Indiana Jones of jazz by Stereophile magazine and is widely known as the Jazz Detective. In 2016, Zev was voted Rising Star Producer in the Downbeat Critics Poll, and he has been voted Producer of the Year in 2022 and 2023. Zev recently relocated to Washington, D.C. after living in L.A. for 17 years. His latest releases include archival recordings by Art Tatum, Ahmad Jamal, Sun Ra, Yusef Lateef, Mal Waldron and Steve Lacy, and Chet Baker. Music historian and author Ashley Kahn was born in the Bronx and raised in Cincinnati. While attending Columbia University, he hosted a radio show on WKCR, the college radio station, where he was known as the Cincinnati Kid. He has written 8 books, including A Love Supreme, the story of John Coltrane's signature album, and The House That Jazz Built, the story of Impulse Records. He is also a prolific liner notes writer. In 2015, he was awarded a Grammy for his album notes to the John Coltrane release Offering, live at Temple University. Welcome to the show, guys.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks
for having us
to do this. So, in the old days, it seemed like every new release, at least those on important jazz labels, had liner notes provided by a well-known jazz writer. This was a way for jazz critics to make a living, such as it was. Now it seems that it is mostly archival recordings and reissues that come with extensive notes. Zev, you are a former journalist, and sometimes you have done your own notes. How do you decide who to hire to do your notes, or whether to do it yourself?
Actually, Rick, I'm not a former journalist.
Okay.
Just wanted to mention that to you, no problem.
I think it said that in one of the articles that was written about you.
I wish I could hold a candle to the journalists out there. The folks that work in this field are individuals that I have such a deep, profound level of respect for. Coming from a semi-dyslexic guy who's been that way my whole life, I really look at folks who are in this community as having superpowers, the way that they're really able to weave their words and articulate all these really important thoughts. I always like to leave it for those pros to talk about.
So how do you decide who will do the notes for your projects and whether to contribute to them yourself?
Well, I always, first of all, like to do like a little captain's log introduction. I always figure that I can't screw that up when you talk about the narrative of how did the project come together. And that is something simply, in my words, that I feel very confident that I'm able to do. I try to stay away from pontificating about certain theories, deep things regarding the music itself, and leave that to the pros. But when it comes to choosing someone to write the liner notes for a project that I'm involved with, there are just a variety of factors. It can do with the style of the writer. It can have to do with, of course, the area of expertise. Perhaps maybe I'm going to hire someone that's written numerous articles or is a published author on the subject. And I really just try to make the best judgment in terms of who I think can do the best job possible, who can tell the story with the music at hand and really do it justice. And sometimes there's even been a leap of faith that I may take too, because I want to get the chance to engage with a certain journalist as well. So it's a variety of different factors, but always trying to make the best call in terms of who is the person that we can bring in to really talk about the artist and put the spotlight on them.
Yeah, there's a lot of preparation that goes into writing liner notes for an archival release. How do you approach it when you get an assignment? Your thoughts, Ashley?
Well, when I get an assignment, obviously there's a lot of research that goes into it, and you try and put the research as direct as possible. So, the participants, the original musicians themselves, the original producer, any other staff people, you want to get as close to the act of recording and the creative act as possible. Sometimes there's still record company people around. Of course, all of this, since a lot of what we're talking about is kind of the golden age of jazz, 50s and 60s, there's less and less year by year of the original participants. So, but that's stop number one. And then, you want to look at how the music was regarded contemporaneously, reviews that came out, interviews that were done the same year. As opposed to a much more general, diffuse kind of set of liner notes that just talk about the artist in general, and that kind of always, rubs me the wrong way, because it's like the job has not been done in explaining and focusing on the music at hand. And so when things become more diffuse, it's not adding to the picture. It's not adding to what's needed. I mean, often liner notes that are connected to music will be the only informational source available, whether it's right now or in years to come, on that particular project. And a lot of bios will skip over it necessarily, because, even an extensive 700 to 800 page biography can't go into each and every recording of, let's say, Sonny Rollins or Charles Mingus or whatever. But liner notes can. And liner notes can give the kind of specificity that's needed. So I guess, I'm sort of ending this answer more with a kind of general philosophy, that every set of liner notes, I think, should be written as if this is the last chance, the last gasp to do right by the music, provide all the information and give context and meaning to the music.
Your notes have won 3 ASCAP Deems Taylor Awards and multiple Grammy nominations. At this point, do labels call you, or do you sometimes offer your services?
Well, you're asking a kind of more general question too in there, and that is, as I tell future music professionals who are often my students, the idea in the music world is to get to the point where you're not hustling all the time, but the calls and the emails, etc., are coming in. That's kind of like where you want to be professionally, no matter what you're, especially if you're an independent, and that's the level you want to be. So I'm happy to say that most of the business comes my way. I'm solicited more than I have to do the soliciting.
Yeah, one more follow-up question on this topic. I was a daily paper guy for most of my career, and that limited the opportunities to do liner notes because, let's say I wrote the liner notes for this new Sun Ra release. I couldn't write about it in the paper.
Yeah, you need that editorial kind of separation.
And so have you ever been in those situations where there's a potential conflict of interest or had to avoid it?
Yeah, but it's self-policed these days.
Zev, what do you think of the critical coverage of your releases so far?
I think that I have been so fortunate and lucky. The reality is, I'm not the only producer in this landscape that's working on these types of projects, and there are a lot of labels that do it. I'm also, just by design of who I am, a very passionate person. So I try to just be who I am and really try to lend my voice. But the reality is, though, that I've been extremely fortunate and lucky, and it's definitely noted that so many members of the JJA are a very big part of that, and I'm very grateful for the attention.
Thank you. This question is for both of you. Does a focus on archival material or reissues in the jazz media play into the narrative that the best jazz happened decades ago? And if so, did the best jazz happen decades ago? And should we make a distinction between archival releases like what Zev does and reissues?
Yeah. A lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
In terms of, which music is the best and everything, I think without saying, I think that, well, this is where I live. I have a thing about nostalgia and the past and knowing, where you've been to know where you're going. But really, there's so much deep history with the legacies of so many of these artists that even me, I'm catching up and learning. It's apples and oranges in some ways. First of all, regarding reissues versus these new releases, you're often talking about a live recording or a live tape versus the studio. And that also kind of brings up something too, which I think this has been an incredibly exciting time in the music business, especially over the last 15 years in particular, as there has been an uptick in archival recordings, tapes that have surfaced, and they bring a lot of happiness in the world. They oftentimes, I wouldn't always use the word rewrite history, but they have a chance to really shed a light on something, and that's oftentimes the live recording. Versus reissues, which are so important. It's part of it's been what's been written in stone. I mean, I'm at a loss to describe it. It's a different type of statement. We've spent so much of our lives listening to studio albums, and reissues are going to continue to be a very big, important part of what we do, getting those musics to younger generations, transcending the audiences, and that happens with so many of these classic albums. So it's a little different than a reissue. Both are equally important to me. It's very hard to draw the line. I find, I'm riveted by both, but they're different. I'm digressing a little bit I'm trying to answer the other part of your questions. What else was there that I could chime in for a little bit more?
Make a distinction between archival, historical albums and reissues.
Yeah, well, I think I kind of said the point between the two. They're different types of statements. They're both very important. But I think the studio records, first of all, are a big part of our education. I mean, our experiences, our journeys, listening to so many of these artists start with doing the deep dive into discographies. So that means studio, but it also, I think, as years and years have gone by and we've listened to a lot of that stuff, when a studio recordings, when you have a chance to listen to a live tape, it can also be revealing and showing something else. Also very important, the live experience, which is something that often for some musicians, comes out better on the stage than it does even in the studio, depending on the musician. Some people would think that, perhaps. Anyways.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think that within your question, I think there's a kind of general idea hovering above it, and that's how to keep people excited about what we consider the kind of golden age, the 50s and 60s, but also, not say, oh, well, you should have been there. Like I should have been there in the 50s, but I wasn't. What you want to do is both balance this idea that everybody has a golden period of music to enjoy. And it's usually when they're in their, late teens and through their 20s. And the way that one absorbs all experience during those years when things are so fresh and new and exciting, that everyone should have that golden period to experience. And I think that's very important to convey. In the world of modern jazz, this is kind of part of the situation. It's always going to be there that from the mid '50s through the up until like the '70s, that's when the giants roamed the earth. And how do you both honor that, but also pay tribute to all the other eras? And the music that's happening today is just as important. The distinction between music that has not been released and has been recently discovered versus reissues, that's a conversation that has been had for a long time. I remember talking to the man whose presence, is kind of here, even though he's no longer with us, Michael Cuscuna, and had a long conversation with him that generated a couple of articles. And his feeling was that we're doing a service to history, much like Zev was saying, that we're completing, we're not rewriting history, we're completing it. I think we're adding dots along the line, along the path for many artists. And also giving especially with the live performances, a rare and very valuable window on what the energy and what was happening on a night by night basis. What Cuscuna was saying was that often these recordings, until they're discovered and then put together, into a release, they only exist as one piece of recording and could easily be lost. And so that his hope and his whole kind of, what he did with all the unreleased Andrew Hill stuff from Blue Note, etc., was to get it out there so there'd be at least 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 copies of this very valuable piece of music that could survive into the future, in whatever format. And as far as reissues, I mean, we'll always want to get kind of blue out there as the technology changes, as there are new platforms upon which to convey music. I mean, it's kind of, guaranteed that, it happens with books and movies, etc. Everything changes as far as the technology. And the first ones to enjoy that technology will always be the kind of greatest hits of whatever genre we're talking about. So reissues will be there for one reason, and the idea of rediscovering all these lost gems, these undiscovered pieces of history that need to be out there too. They'll be there too.
Is there a perception that you've experienced sometimes among musicians, current musicians, and record labels and publicists, that attention that is given to archival material takes away from possible attention that could be given to new releases? Now, I'm speaking both in terms of print media and radio play with this question. Zev, have you experienced that?
I mean, I have seen rumblings around. I've seen this echoed from other individuals. I don't know. I don't really go with the motivation of getting articles written when I'm doing these projects. And these things happen naturally, sometimes on their own, with certain journalists in the community who are passionate about the subjects at hand and oftentimes will champion a recording, whether that means writing about it or featuring it on a radio program or all sorts of different ways. I'm just grateful for the attention that these projects do garner, whether that is a new archival release or a new recording from an artist that's making statements currently. Both are important. I wouldn't like to think of one taking away from the other. I can't control what happens out there, but it has been It's certainly exciting when you work on a release of any caliber, any type, that to see the interest out there flourish. That's very wonderful. That's a very nice thing. But I can't control that. But other people have opinions. What do you think, Ashley?
Well, I think that what Rick's bringing up, Rick knows the answer to this, especially having been in the journalistic trade. What you're touching upon here is cultural reporting, and the idea that there's a lot of cultural reporting that is not done by those who, have done the homework. And they are saddled with having the responsibility of reporting on the culture. And you always go with what's safe and true. And what's safe and true in movies and novels and etc. always returns to the same kind of canon of culture. And in the world of modern jazz, it's exactly the same. It's easier to write about the big names. Does it seem like that when there's X amount of real estate available? I mean, there's a lot more real estate available now, of course, with the internet for coverage. But the idea is the coverage that everyone goes to, or the coverage that people see. So someone at, I don't want to nail down any one sort of mainstream online publication, but let's say Pitchfork. It's much easier for writers there to focus on that which is kind of mainstream and has been established than taking a chance on something new. Although I have seen some great writing at Pitchfork on jazz and connecting jazz to the current, how things are in this country today, in the world today, and making the necessary contextual insights, providing that for the music. So, as I say the name, I kind of I'm drawing it back right away and saying, but Pitchfork has been very valuable in covering today's scene as well. I would just say it's like what source are you going to, and where do you get your news? So general statements about the state of things, it's never been different. It's always been that way. Mainstream coverage of modern jazz has always been somewhat wanting.
So both of you have seen this from both sides, the label, production, promotion side of the music business, and the journalistic critic side. Is there an inherent conflict there?
Which part with there being a conflict?
Well, between a desire to promote the art form and to write good things about people who deserve it, and a desire to be a critic. And what a critic does is sometimes write things that aren't positive.
Right. Well, let's talk about the other side too. Just first of all, when you have a fire in your belly over a certain project, like the Cal Jader was one where I just really believed in it. I wanted it to come out. I love Cal Jader. I'm going to be a champion for it. But I got to also look at a P&L that shows me that it's an incredibly risky release. And I think sometimes and often and always, it's the love of the music first that comes first. And trying to find a way, can we make a release sustainable so it can be released, so it can come out officially? It's very challenging. In terms of the journalistic side, I think that Ashley could probably comment more. But when it comes to me, for instance, in bringing a project out, it's about what am I most passionate about? And the other things will fall into place. And can I make the numbers work? Because unfortunately, I live and die by numbers in so much of what I do, which is a little different than the journalistic call and is more on the business side. But it kind of falls into this category a little bit as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, Rick, again, you're asking questions that are each one of them could be like an hour and a half discussion. What you're touching upon here is the idea that our culture is driven and somehow guided by the commercial impulse. And that's the kind of reality that we live in. If the numbers aren't there, or the projected numbers aren't there, the P&L, profit and loss idea that Zev was referring to, that music doesn't come out. Our culture is kind of stuck in this idea. And our history, our cultural history, lives on in archives that are kept by commercial enterprises. Sometimes for them to even go into that archive, they have to have a project connected to it, which has a budget supporting it. Otherwise, ain't nobody going in there, because the time is money, and the effort to do that isn't going to happen. So this is the reality. Is it good? Is it bad? It doesn't matter. It just is the reality, and we have to somehow find a way of working around that and working with it. Journalistically, it's a totally different thing. What I'm doing is you're stepping back and like looking at the machine, describing it, talking about what it does, and then looking at the results of what it produces. I'm not a critic, by the way. I do not assign value to music. I really try and not do that, although it's impossible not to, because musical appreciation and musical involvement is a subjective thing. So you are making quality judgments. My kind of approach to music is, if I'm covering it, I'm usually doing it for a reason, and that usually is because I support it, and I support it wholeheartedly. Whether it's something that's happening right now, it's new music that's just being created, or it's something historical. So I guess that's my answer to that.
Yep.
I don't know if it really, penetrated what you were hoping it would do, but like I said, it's a bigger question.
And I want to say, too, there is such a role, as I've been living through, as a curator who's going to champion the project in the first place. And guess what? I mean, I know what I said before about living and dying by numbers, and that is a reality. But there are instances as well where we do projects because we believe in them so much. Are we going to go broke? Can at least break even? I can think of a couple of examples, including an Albert Eiler box set where that was the case, where there had to be some serious soul searching with the label executive saying, you know what, this fits what we do. This is part of our mission. We are passionate music people. But it also takes the curator, like again with Cal Jader, which was a really hard project, to say, you know what, it matters. And to be able to put the heart into it. They're a combination of all these different factors and everything that goes into this process. But there are also times of, hey, we are in a position of doing something really good for the music too. And you know what? It's really interesting to see that sometimes those underdog projects are the ones that can somehow get a lot more attention out there too. There's just, like you said, so much to talk about, but it's really about the love of the music. And I think so much, again, that fire in our belly for an artist or a tape or something that we believe in, and when you're willing to put it all on the line for that too. It's a lot of risk taking, especially when you're working with investors. And if the numbers don't match, like, you got to slam dunk every time. Otherwise, you're not going to get the ball again. If you're not able to make it work, it has to work. It's such a challenging paradigm to be in sometimes, though, in terms of these factors, because we're oftentimes looking over a P&L, looking at the numbers, trying to find a way of slicing it or presenting it in some way just to make it possible so it can come out. And it's better for it to come out versus not to come out in many cases, especially if the music is there. And man, what Michael Cuscuna said, Ashley, like, I think about that a lot. It's one thing for a tape. It's one thing for a recording to be on YouTube, forgive me, or somewhere else where it's come out in some part of the world as someone, it hasn't really come out until it's come out. And there's something really about his words, Michael's words, that has stayed with me. And that's
Right.
why this work is so important for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, what Michael's philosophy was, of course, he was espousing that before the internet kind of took over, before YouTube. But even with YouTube, there's this general, kind of confidence that once something's on the internet, it'll always be there. Well, first of all, it's lost in a sea of data. And number two, what if YouTube goes out of business and suddenly all those videos disappear? That's what happened to Jazz Times Magazine. There's something like a 45, 50-year history of articles and what, I mean, at least the physical magazines are still around. But this is what I'm talking about, is the idea that it needs to be there in multiple places, searchable places where it can be found, and in a way that's reliable. Michael put his money where his mouth was. He started his own label, and that label was not. He was not answering to any higher ups at that label, and that, of course, I'm talking about, Mosaic. And of course, there was a limited number of box sets that he could do for each title. But that idea, I think, was very important too, is that those were labors of love, and the packaging and the everything about it was fantastic, and the information was there too.
Yeah.
So
I'm fortunate to have been on the receiving end of the publicity train for all those CD reissues in the 1990s. I think I have a complete set of Mosaic up until about 1999.
Nice.
Yeah, nice. Zev, who's out there, if anyone, that you've got your eye on that might have some previously unreleased historical material?
Oh boy. Well, there are too many archives to name, because thankfully I'm very in tune and working on a regular basis, whether it's the Left Bank archives these days, the folks at INA in France, which has been an unbelievable resource of previously unofficially released recordings. There's a lot of places to get tapes, but it's really about finding the right tape. And there's a distinction to be made between good and great. And it's around finding the very best. Listen, if the music doesn't present the artist in the best light, doesn't have something positive to contribute, we got to make a case. First of all, why does this tape need to come out in the first place? But there are archives all over. I would say, in terms of like something that's on a wish list that I've been looking for my holy grail, I've heard for many years now about recordings that Larry Young and John Coltrane made together. And to me, that would be something extremely thrilling if there was a way for something like that to come to light. And we're currently being surprised. I mean, the Art Tatum Jewels in a Treasure Box release that we just put out on Resonance is an example of something of a Dead Sea Scrolls sort of epic proportion, over 65 years old, from one of the greatest musicians. And it's not just good, it's great. And it's like you get a time machine. I just think that when we're able to put these projects out, and especially when we do the promotion within the community, we are creating opportunities to celebrate the legacies of these artists. And that's done in different ways. It's done with the music coming out for the fans to listen, and it's also via the community to come out and behind it as well. So there's all sorts of different, very positive ways that this has a trickle effect, if it will. It leads to other things. And the best part, you're going to turn on new people. You're going to have somebody that's going to listen for the first time, that's going to discover that artist, and then they're going to go back and do the deep dive. And we're hoping for that result all the time. So it happens naturally, and sometimes it really surprises us on the projects too. But anyways, there's just quite a bit to be said there.
I hope you locate that Holy Grail, because I would like to listen to Larry Young playing with John Coltrane. Any final thoughts?
Well, just like what we've been touching upon for the last 45 minutes or whatever, is this general idea of like providing doorways, opening up doors. It doesn't matter, I think, if Kind of Blue or a reissue or a recently discovered thing is out there, as long as there's this constant movement, new releases, reissues, conversations, articles out there about the music that we love and care for, and keeps the scene moving and vital, there will be new artists and there'll be new music. And that's what we're really doing, is just guaranteeing a kind of future for this music and opening up doors, like I said. And what we need to do is attract more and more listeners, whether it is Kind of Blue and whether it is something from the golden era or something like Joel Ross's new album, which I'm a huge fan of too, by the way. It doesn't matter. It's as long as who's ever stepping into this world of creative improvised music of the Black root, here in America, which has now kind of become an international language. All they need to do then is enter into this world and explore on their own. And everybody finds their own path and bounces around between the old and the new, and the big bands and small groups and solo acts, etc., and live and recordings. That's what we're looking to do. And that's really what it's all about.
We've been talking with Ashley Kahn and Zev Feldman on the subject of jazz journalism and archival releases. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you for listening to The Buzz, a podcast produced by the Jazz Journalists Association. We release new episodes monthly on all the major platforms. To hear more about us, go to jjanews.org. This episode was edited by Wiz Petta. The John Michaels composition, Big Vic, is our theme music. I'm Rick Mitchell. Peace.